Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to get started. Firstly, just to say that I hope that you and your families are well. I'm Katie Jacobs from the CIPD and welcome back to our coronavirus series of webinars. And in this session, we're going to be exploring something a little bit different to what we've done in the past. We're going to be looking at the impact that coronavirus is having on learning and development and what the future looks like for the profession and function. And joining me to discuss this and share their insights and their stories, three bona fide L&D experts. We've got Andy Lancaster, my colleague, Head of Learning at the CIPD and author of the award-winning book, Driving Performance Through Learning. We're joined by Sarah Linsdale, Global Chief Learning Strategist at PwC, and Jenny McCulloch, Head of Learning Experience Design at BBC Academy. Thank you so much for joining us today, all of you. As ever, I'm just going to run through some very quick housekeeping. First up, to remind you that the session is being recorded and it will be available on demand via the webinar section of the CIPD website, and a reminder that you can find access to all of our previous webinars there and sign up for future sessions. To flag that on Friday, we're having a session looking at the psychological impact of this crisis, and then next Tuesday, it's Tuesday because it's after the bank holiday, we'll be looking at the results of our UK Work and Working Lives survey, which is revealing how people feel about work right now. Secondly, a reminder that if you want to submit questions, and I really encourage you to ask questions during this because that's where I think a lot of the really great content comes from, could I ask you to please use the Q&A tab, which you can see at the bottom of your screen. Please don't use the chat box for questions. For legal advice, a reminder that CIPD members can call our HR Inform helpline. It's available 24/7 and you'll get an individual response. And a reminder that we're updating the FAQs and our resources on our website all the time. Head to the CIPD Coronavirus Hub for more. And finally, I'm just going to flag our new Wellbeing Hub and helpline that's available to our members in the UK and Ireland. Together with award-winning workplace wellbeing provider Health Assured, we are now providing CIPD members with free help and support 24/7, 365 days a year. It's a service by which you can access telephone or online consultations with qualified therapists. Members can access the phone number and the online services via the membership benefits webpage, and you'll see a slide on that at the end of the session. So, on with the show today. We know that organisations have had to respond rapidly to the impact of the pandemic, changing how and where they operate, as well as reconsidering the services that they offer. That means that many organisations have had to redeploy, upskill or reskill staff quickly, while individuals have seen a dramatic shift in how and often where they work. Organisations that have used the job retention scheme have also had to think about how they're supporting furloughed workers. So what impact has all of this had on how organisations deliver learning, and what impact will it continue to have, given that it looks like we won't be returning to any semblance of normality anytime soon? That's what we're going to talk about today. I'll just take you through our running order. First up, Andy is going to explore how COVID-19 has impacted the learning landscape and talk about how L&D professionals can best adapt. Sarah will then talk about how the pandemic could shape how we design and deliver learning in the future and share a bit of insight into how it's impacted her work at PwC. And then Jenny will share how the situation has impacted learning at the BBC and what they're doing to adapt. And then we'll go into questions. But before Andy kicks off, we're trying something a little bit new. We're doing a poll. We're bringing a little bit of innovation into this one. So could I ask you to answer the question that you should be able to see on your screen at the moment? I'll just read it out as well. To what extent has COVID-19 challenged how you facilitate learning in your context and think about future solutions? Has it challenged your existing and future learning approaches significantly? Has it challenged them to some extent? Has it not really challenged your existing and future learning approaches? Has it been actually learning as usual? So if I could ask you to fill that in. And I'm going to hand over to Andy to go through his slides and also, hopefully, because I don't know how this works, reveal the results to that poll. Thanks, Andy.
Okay, guys, so fantastic to have you with us, and I'm glad you could join us on this particular session. So I think, Danielle, you're going to have to publish because you're the master of control here on in terms of what we're doing in terms of the poll. So I think you'll need to just give us a view on what's going on there. So can you give us can you cut to those and give us the results from that one? Okay, so we're having one or two issues there. So
all learning as we go.
There we go. There we go. Okay, so that's kind of cool. So you can see there on the results there, you can see that, yeah, over half, 56% are recognizing that this has been incredibly challenging for us. And I think that would be the case for CIPD as well, that we're seeing this has been fundamental to how we've been thinking about delivering learning. And only about 2% of those on the session here actually can say learning has been as usual, which I think is really interesting. As we unpack this in the next few minutes with myself, Sarah and Jenny, and with questions, we'll see that those of you who are experiencing learning as normal probably have made a massive step forward in how you're delivering your learning. So that's really helpful to look at that. So yes, for most of us in the L&D profession, this has been really quite significant in terms of how our practice is going. So I've got one or two glitches here just in terms of right, there we go, fantastic. So that's really helpful. Sorry guys, got one or two things going on here. We've got lots of screens open here and lots of slide decks. So I just want to talk a little bit initially about a crisis and the fact that pressure actually sometimes drives transformation. So if you think about a common pencil and you think about diamonds, those two things are so vastly different, and yet they have the same chemical composition. So lead and diamonds are very similar, but you know, in terms of their chemical background. But the one thing that's made them very different is that diamonds have been under immense pressure, which actually kind of transforms their structure and makes them very valuable and very resilient. And what we're seeing in terms of a crisis is that often the pressure is the one thing that can drive transformation. So just in a few minutes, I just want to share how we're seeing this as a real opportunity for L&D teams to transform things because of the pressures they're facing. And I think it was Plato who said necessity is the mother of invention. In other words, sometimes when we're forced into really challenging circumstances, that's when we can kind of get really creative. So those are the kind of, you know, the circumstances we find ourselves in. And I want to share just a few thoughts around organizational learning. What we're finding and seeing in organizations during COVID-19 is that this requires a very new foundation, which I think points to the future of learning. And I know Sarah and Jenny will be sharing some thoughts from PwC and BBC. But what we're seeing is this is a time for transformation and a new foundation for us. And I've just got four very quick things just to share with you in terms of how we CIPD see things are changing. And it fits around prioritizing learning, how we're thinking about digitizing learning, going to do a little bit around the whole socialization of learning, and particularly I want to end by thinking about how we actually humanize learning. And those four things are really important in terms of the structure and the way we're thinking about learning now. Daniel, I've got one or two issues just with menus here, so I think it might be easy for you just to move the slides on for me. I'm struggling a little bit to be able to move those slides on. So if you could take control of the screen, that would be really helpful. So thank you, Daniel, that's perfect. So one thing we're noticing with many organizations that during COVID-19, this is not just about taking our existing stock of face-to-face training and actually just dumping this into online formats. It's not the way that we should be thinking around this. In fact, it's a far more profound and transformational opportunity. So organizations that we see are really innovating in their learning and not just thinking we take our face-to-face catalog and we just drop that into an online format, but thinking about a more profound way of approaching their learning. So yeah, next slide, Danielle, will be really perfect. So this is a challenge of moving from familiar face-to-face surroundings to digital environments. And we did a piece of research last year around professionalizing learning and development. And what was really interesting in that piece of research was that the expectations of both learners and particularly senior leaders is that face-to-face is the most comfortable place for us to have our learning experiences. And often the thing that's blocking, or the biggest blocker for innovation, is the expectation of leaders and learners about we want to have a face-to-face environment. And quite clearly COVID-19 has forced this movement from face-to-face to a digital environment. So next slide. So just going to think about prioritizing. And I want you just to think, as I go through these slides here, think about your own priorities, because I'm going to drop a reflective question in at the end. This is now about, in COVID-19 circumstances, about the real priorities for the organization. So next slide. What we're seeing is organizations that have done really well during this season have really focused in, a laser focus on exactly what's needed to support the organization and business. And to this slide, what I've put on the left-hand side is, it really, in many cases, has been the props that have enabled the organizational business to actually continue not only to survive, but to thrive. So what we're seeing in learning and development is a real focus on what are the crucial solutions that are needed. And to that end, we have to listen very carefully to our stakeholders and to our senior leaders. So it's moving us, and we know this has been happening in learning and development, it's moving us very much towards a real focus on consulting conversations to think about what is required. And for many organizations, that's shifted massively in the last few weeks during this kind of crisis. Next slide. So we're seeing organizations are having to respond far more design far more responsively. Whereas, sometimes it's taken us weeks or months to design things. In this environment now, in many cases, we're designing things each day in order to support the organization. And that means we've got to get far more around propositions which work. They can't be perfect. I might like a chocolate biscuit, but I've got to have a plain biscuit right now, because we have to create things which are in time for the business to use. And that's a very different kind of response for many learning departments. Okay, next slide. So this means we've got to repurpose and curate far more. So this is about taking content, which might be our own content or other people's content, and really thinking about not reinventing the wheel, but how do we repurpose things quite quickly? And to that extent, it's worth just asking the question, where do you find great content? There are so many sources of this. So to be reactive and responsive in this kind of circumstances, it is about repurposing learning. Next slide. So reflective question. Thinking about what L&D teams are doing right now, the question is, what is the key business critical need in your context? And we've got to ask those questions, because the likelihood is they'll be very different from some of the things that we've been doing previously. We might have management development programs, all these kind of things going on, but right now we maybe needed to focus on digital skills as the things that are going to power the business. So that's kind of prioritizing. So the next slide will just take us on to thinking about digitizing. And I mentioned that this is not just about taking a catalog of face-to-face learning and just trying to ditch this into a digital environment. There's far more creative opportunities for us. So next slide. So technology is the heart of overcoming the pandemic. One thing we've noticed in the broader setting is that technology solutions are really important in how we address and approach the pandemic. So we're even seeing things like tracking apps now, which are going to, all being well, provide us with support in how we manage the pandemic. So it should be no surprise that technology should be at the heart of how learning addresses the pandemic. So the next slide just kind of shows that organizations have had to really think and invest and upgrade their digital infrastructure. This has caught many organizations out who maybe had great plans for where their technology was going, but have now found, particularly in the learning environment, that maybe it's just not where it needs to be. So one thing we are noticing is that many learning departments and organizations are really thinking about how they upgrade and how they leverage in a different way. And to one extent, this is exactly what we're doing here. We're gathering together in a Zoom environment in order to share some thinking. Next slide. So this is around learning ecosystems and environments. And I know Sarah and Jenny will be able to mention how this is specifically working for them. But what we're seeing is digital learning is not seen as a separate entity anymore. What we're seeing is it's a direct part of what we're doing. And we produced a learning cultures report fairly recently, which looked at the whole thing of how we need to create great environments for learning. So this is now a brilliant opportunity for us as learning professionals to understand that digital is at the heart of the learning ecosystem. And that, if it hasn't been the case already, that isn't going to change. So next slide. So one thing we've just been looking at is what do brilliant digital learning solutions look like? And it's not the traditional old LMS or e-learning. What we're now looking is at flexible, accessible, collaborative learning opportunities, tailored, which provide brilliant content to suit your particular circumstances and which drive performance. And again, yep, just throwing it in is something we found in doing the research for the book. We found that learning solutions now which are doing really well have these attributes around them. And you can probably think about your digital music or the way you view films now. It's a very different scenario from our traditions. So next slide. So we need to really be thinking around how do we build those kind of things together. So what are the challenges and opportunities that you have around digital learning? So it's thinking a little bit around what your learners what devices they might be using. We're finding that for the webinars we're delivering, some people are using those on laptops, PCs, but some people are using them on mobile phones. And designing for particular digital streams, it's really important to think how those work. So the third thing is just thinking around, next slide, the third thing is thinking around a little bit around socializing, how we socialize learning. So next slide. So we need to think about connections. So already we've got Katie and Jenny and Sarah and I connecting from various places and all of you guys joining us. So COVID-19 has quite clearly forced us into new ways of social connection, be that through webinars or digital classrooms. And this is the case with learning. So the next slide begins to unpack that. What we know is that social learning is a very natural approach. It's something we did in our past. In ancient history, people learned in social communities and people learned their trades through social interaction. And we know children learn particularly well with social learning connections. So what we're seeing is that it's a really crucial thing that in the learning in COVID-19 and the future, that how we connect people in learning groups is really important. So next slide, Daniel. So some research we did with Towards Maturity fairly recently found that organizations that are intentionally making time for social learning are finding great benefits from those kind of flexibilities. So organizations, it's not that we do this kind of just because we have to, but that intentionally now we're really thinking about socialized learning as an important way in connecting people in learning. Next slide. So I just would throw out to you, what learning networks or communities do you value? So for me, obviously I'm part of CIPD, but we have LinkedIn, we have Twitter, we have many social networks. So learning for many of us now is a social environment, and we need to think with our organizations how we best support that. So next slide. So just to say, the most fruitful gardens are those that are cultivated. They are looked after. And what we find with many organizations who aspire for social learning are finding that it's not just a simple thing of dumping a forum up, but understanding that we have to manage these things. And a great example from NASA, who put a thing called Spacebook up, which actually failed because they didn't have senior leader buy-in, they didn't train the people, they didn't resource it brilliantly well. So we know that if you want to aspire to use social communities, we've really got to think through about how we support and cultivate those. Next slide. So just a reflective question on this third point. If you're using online communities, it's really thinking about your plan to support these communities. How can you really get around these communities to make these happen? They just don't function brilliantly well if they're left to their own devices. And the last thing just to kind of to pick up on is humanizing learning. This is a really interesting time. I'm right now broadcasting from my front room at home, and I suspect it's the same for others. We are in a very different work situation to that which most of us work in. So we've really got to think about the human dynamics of designing learning. So next slide. Many of us now are not only learning in the flow of work, but we're learning in the flow of life. We might have family at home. I delivered a session the other day and someone had a dog on their lap, quite bizarre. This is the nature of how learning is right now. So we've really got to think about the human aspects of enabling people to learn in the flow of their new lives. So the next slide just kind of highlights that human-centered learning design is really important for us. And this is something we're seeing that many learning organizations are now really focusing on, is understanding what the learner needs, not what the organization necessarily wants to deliver. So just, Daniel, you can click on 2 or 3 times here. Let's go for the 3 boxes. Some work by IDEO shows that empathizing with learners is really important. So we need to understand what our learners are actually dealing with as the starting point. And that's the point where we then can come up with great ideas, understanding what their circumstances might be. And the next, if you click again, Danielle, it's then about implementation, whereas often the organization tends to think what the organization needs, but now we need to turn this on its head and really think about human-centered design and what our learners need. So just to kind of round off before I head and pass to Sarah, this is really thinking about how do we involve learners to really shape solutions. For folks right now working at home or working remotely, how do we design in ways that really support their learning? So a slide just to kind of finish off. It is uncertain where we're going, but you know what? I think it's going to change L&D for the better. I think if we focus on prioritizing what our organizations really need, not just our stock courses, if we think about not just dumping things into digital, but think about great opportunities for designing great digital learning, it's about supporting communities and connecting people together. And it's also thinking about the human aspects of learning design. I think we're then in a really better position to think about not only addressing learning and innovating learning in a COVID-19 scenario, but also where learning is going. And I guess our premise at CIPD is we think these four things are going to underpin great future learning. So that's kind of my intro, and I'm now going to pass to Sarah to give some thoughts from PwC. So massive thanks, Sarah, for joining us out of your amazingly busy schedule as well. But I know it's had a massive impact on what you're doing at PwC. So just to pass to you from that kind of opener, just to get some thoughts from you.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. I thought what I'd do is, first of all, just share, like as a global L&D function, we're supporting, along with the territories, 350,000 employees in PwC. To give some context, in the UK firm alone, we went from having everybody based in offices, and obviously some people working at home and client sites, etc., to supporting 20,000 people working at home overnight. So your comment on having that infrastructure ready to go, you know, did that stand up? Yes, it's standing up brilliantly. Hopefully that will continue throughout this presentation. But, you know, it's really interesting in the things that we are having to do as L&D professionals to think about the future, but at the same time sort of pivot and respond to what's going on right this very second. So I thought I'd share some quick sort of stuff about what we've done in learning and development over the past, whoa, what feels like a year, but only a couple of months to sort of respond to this. So when all of this really started sort of gathering pace, I was sitting at home one weekend and I thought, you know what, we have got to start thinking about how we're going to respond to this, because you could see where everything was tracking. So I knew that we had to act quickly in order to support our L&D professionals and people around the globe. So on the Monday morning, I came in and put together like a rapid response task force, and I had 3 goals. So to help our learners be able to find what they needed to know quickly in order for them to be as productive as possible when this shutdown happened. To help L&D teams around the world figure out how to pivot from face-to-face to digital, and then to leverage all of our learning data for insights. So what could we learn ourselves from what we were seeing in front of us, but then also to help our leadership. So within sort of 72 hours, we had the page that you see on the right-hand side here on working virtually set up. And what we did was we used this first and foremost to help people find stuff on learning very quickly. And we really thought about what it was that people actually needed in that first sort of like few days. And it was really things like, how do I work effectively from home? How do I manage to do meetings? How do I you know, set up a virtual team if I've never had to set up a virtual team before? So this page was up there within 72 hours, which coincided then with people starting to work from home. And we have constantly refreshed this as the weeks have gone on and changed its focus slightly to respond to exactly what is needed at the week that we find ourselves in. So if you can go to the next slide for me, please. So obviously how we did that, we have really concentrated on looking at what we've got. We have got fabulous content within PwC, and that is internally developed content, but also external content that we have from, you know, a variety of different suppliers. So what we actually did was really upped our curation function, which we're lucky enough to have within PwC. So we curated new playlists and compositions of content based on the challenges that we saw in front of us at that particular point in time. And then we kept refreshing that content with what was coming from different parts of the business. So suddenly you saw a whole load of content coming out from the Google team, because we're a Google Enterprise client, around, you know, how to create effective meetings, how to use chat. So what we did was we actually started populating other content into our system to make that available. And we also saw this tremendous uptake in posting user-generated content as well. That's one of the trends that we've really seen. So the last thing we did was actually implement a new COVID-19 filter in our learning system, which then allowed everybody to be able to tag stuff specifically for COVID, and then that would sort of flag up within our system as well. So we really thought about it from all angles, you know, what L&D needed, what people needed themselves and our learners, and then how we could sort of use our data to inform us. So if you go on to the next slide for us. So the next thing that we did is, in terms of helping L&D, was we created a community of interest to connect those people that wanted to convert multi-day face-to-face events to a virtual format. So we've done that in multiple different ways. We've shared all of the best practice. We've collected best practice from territories and people who are spinning up totally new ways of doing things. So for example, in Australia, they created this brand new onboarding program. And they use some really innovative ways of tying together some simple tools. And so we shared all of that across our network. And then we also put together almost like a clearinghouse of where people had resources, like maybe you had a whole team of people who were able to produce fantastic WebEx sessions, and we put different people in contact with people who were needing that, right? So if somebody was trying to host an event but they didn't have any decent producers, could we link those people up so that we could rapidly respond? And we're doing that, and this group is meeting on a weekly basis at the moment. And the reason why we wanted to put that together was to be able to really just make sure that people were using their time really smartly, right? Most of us around the network are all trying to solve the same problems. So let's solve that once and share it. It's really complicated work at the moment. You know, we're all working in environments where we've got, you know, we might be homeschooling children. We might be working in an environment in our home where we've got lots of people around us that we wouldn't normally have, or we might be flat sharing and working with 4 other people from different organizations round a kitchen table type of thing. So it was really about making people be able to think about that from an L&D perspective when they were building these new environments and facilitating all this best practice. And then the other thing we did was we run a learning academy for all of our L&D professionals globally. And we really did a very quick skill build and refresh of that. So we, as you can see on the screen, we ran 8 sessions of designing on a dime. So being able to just create engaging VC designs. We ran WebEx refreshers. We ran little tiny skill sessions on how to create success with breakout rooms, how to do virtual facilitation skills. And we're continuing all of that at the moment as well. So we're polling our L&D people continually to find out what sort of stuff that they want, and then that we can rapidly create content around to help and support them. So then the third thing that we were looking at was, how do we use our data to inform what we are doing? And for the first time in this sort of crisis situation, we have had the most astonishing amount of available learning data to us, because we put a data analytics system in for learning a couple of years ago, which is really coming into its own at the moment. So we are using search data to understand in real time what learners are looking for. And against that, we've curated or changed or promoted our content accordingly. And if you don't have that sort of learning data to fall back on, you can do that by polling your business, by polling your people. There's multiple different ways to get some of this data in that you can start reacting to. So we've been able to look at our data and look at territories that were early on in the crisis and see what people were searching for, and then being able to promote some of that content forward as the sort of virus went around the world. So we've been really looking at that data and seeing what is enabled us to be able to do. And then we've looked at like rapid changes in learning behavior in near real time. So we've been able to look at data that we had in February and March, see spikes. We've been able to see the trends across where our different lines of service and people in different business units are accessing training. And then we've also, which I think is really fantastic for our leadership, is we developed a COVID-19 tracker for territories. So they're able to go in and they're able to see all of this data that's generated from them. And then we've helped them with a series of questions to help them interpret that data and what that means to them in their particular territory and where they are in the sort of response at a particular time. And on the right hand side, you can see some of those graphs. It's been absolutely fascinating for us because we've been able to see also by business unit which people are accessing learning more and where that's tailing off, and really understand the sort of stuff that they're looking for. And that's enabled us to have the most on-point curation policy as well, and really be able to supplement stuff. So where we've seen that we've got people searching for data or searching for a particular search term, we've actually been able to go, okay, so what content do we have that matches that? Is it we've only got one piece of content, or do we have 29 pieces of content, and which one is the best that we want these people to be looking at that particular time? So it's enabled us either to see holes and gaps in our content and then plug that, or be able to promote the most relevant piece of content that we think they should be looking at from a PwC perspective. So for us, it's been fascinating to see like our data in action, and I'm really calling it like a real-time benefits realization of learning data and what you can do with it. So it's been really super interesting for us, and we're learning so much ourselves on that. So that's what we've done, and that's how we're sort of moving through our response to help our learners, help our L&D professionals, and looking at our data to inform that sort of stuff. So if you go on to the next slide, you know, then I'm sitting here thinking, okay, so what's next? So we've got all this stuff that we need to support on a daily basis, and we need to change our content, and we need to help our territories. But I've got a gazillion and one questions in my mind that are spinning around at the moment of to what's next. So what's the impact on learning culture? I was really interested when Andy wrote down, you know, learning in the flow of work and life. I'm like, I'm so going to use that one, because I've been sitting here saying, what does it mean to learning in the flow of work? More importantly, what does it mean to on-the-job learning when you might not be in an environment where you would normally be learning from others or from your peers? You know, how do we need to adapt to be able to consider all of those things? How do we best serve our business in this time? How do we make every dollar count? I don't know about you, but I think a lot of people are looking at their budgets, looking at what's going forward next year, thinking about where they want to put their training budget, for instance. So how do you make every dollar count? What's the impact on our learning culture going to be? How do we need to change that? What do we need to promote? Will we ever be in a classroom again in the same way that we were only, you know, 4 or 5 months ago? The other thing I've been thinking about is, are our tools fit for purpose? We have got a fantastic learning ecosystem at PwC, but now we're thinking about how do we deliver different types of events virtually, and what are our new learning blueprints? Have we got the right tools? Have we got everything we need to have really engaging conversation? Great sort of facilitated event over a period of time. So we're looking at all of that at the moment as well. And then we're also sort of looking at how we measure learning now. So how do we measure the impact of learning now the majority of that is going to be online? And then what are the new skills, and how do we develop those for our people? You know, other things that are sort of really top of mind for me at the moment is things like, how do we keep track of things that we might have had on our learning plan for the next 12 months that we might need to do completely differently. So you might have had a learning need that you were going to recognize in 2 or 3 different ways, and you might only be thinking about, oh, well, we'll just do the technical training online. You know, how do you then think about wrapping those other skills that you're leaving on the table and putting those into a virtual environment as well? So that really for me is like a real quick run through of how we've responded, and then all the questions that are sort of keeping me up at night.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Sounds like you're not getting very much sleep. You've got all of those really fascinating questions buzzing around your brain the whole time. We've had some really great, thoughtful questions come in, so do keep them coming. But before we get to that, I'm going to hand over to Jenny, who's going to give us a quick case study on how everything's been working at the BBC. Thanks, Jenny.
Yeah. Hello. I don't have any slides because this morning I've been busy teaching Spanish to my daughter and helping my son with his physics in this new dual world that I live in. So I'm going to talk a bit about the BBC, but I'm going to take it from two perspectives because we're such a diverse organisation and the pandemic has affected us very differently in both areas. So if you look at news, the biggest challenge for us really is how we operate at a time where there's an absolutely colossal demand for our services. So much so that just overnight, web browsers on the news pages went up from 45 million browsers to 84 million overnight. There was an overnight increase in viewers to news of about 64 to 80%, depending on what time of day you were tuning into the news. And we had a newsroom that was designed for a 24-hour-a-day rolling news, built around hot desks, built around people being physically located together. So news in itself has been that balance of how do you keep this function that we all need, that the public are dependent on the BBC to deliver, in an environment where we're just not set up to do that. Equally, the hub's in London, we've had a lot of illness in London, so how do you balance that staff? On the flip side to that, we've got the non-news, so we can't film any dramas anymore. We've got production staff at home without work that they can be doing. We can't film any programmes that rely on studio audiences, so we've got no chat shows, no comedy, we've got no live sport. This was an Olympic summer. So that's a huge amount of TV output that's just disappeared overnight. On the plus side, though, we've got the iPlayer, which is just booming. The viewers are staggering. The normal people, Killing Eve. BBC Sounds is thriving. Podcast is the new listen again. And our operational functions, much like Sarah, overnight, about 20,000 people were working from home. And actually, some of our functions are working better from home or as well from home as they have been at work. One of those, our HR service centre are working phenomenally well being based at home. So it's meant that as an organisation, we need to be more agile, but we also need to be more creative. So from a learning and development perspective, it's been quite a challenge because we've got this emerging immediate need. And like PwC, within hours of the announcement being made to work from home, we had available on our website a collection of resources that supported people in that moment of need. How do I work from home? How do I manage my team effectively from home? How do I manage my well-being during this time? So we had those resources curated from what we had already. The BBC Academy itself is in the process of a transformation. So we're 18 months in, we've done a lot of thinking about the future of learning. My whole role is about user-centred design. That is the key to what we do at the BBC Academy now, is we put our learners first. We no longer take orders and we actually turn the mirror back round on the stakeholder and say, actually, what is it that you want as an outcome? What do you want your people to be doing differently? So we've spent 18 months not just moving classroom courses online, but actually taking that curricula of what we're delivering on a classroom course and looking at how we deliver it through a more interesting and engaging programme of continuous development that aids that flowing in the point of work or life. So people, we're a 24-hour operation, so people want to dig in when they have that moment of need, not book onto a classroom course and wait for a date and fly over from France to do it. So that's sort of the context. So for us, we were quite ready. We were quite ready for this. And actually, we've been battling against the business to say, this is the way, this is the new normal wasn't a word then, but this is the way L&D is. This is the future of L&D. We still had, but I need people in classroom courses because I want to tick them off my list to say that they've been and the learning's been done. So we've been doing a lot of lobbying around the business to get people to understand that learning happens through the transfer of knowledge over a period of time, not sheep dips in an online or classroom way. So we were quite well set up. So as soon as the pandemic hit, we worked with the curation of content for those well-being and working from home perspectives. Then we looked very quickly at what news needed. So we had lots of people in the business that were in production that were not able to produce, but had skills that could support the news team. So we looked at how we reskilled and upskilled people with some of the offers, putting together curated pathways of content that people could use just to sort of dust off some of those rusty skills, so that we had a pool of people that news could lean on. So, and things like portable news gathering, which is what we call filming on a mobile phone. We ran masterclasses on those hour after hour after hour for about 3 or 4 days, so that people had that filming. So that was our first priority. Second to that, I've just caught in my eye, a delivery van's just arrived. Second to that, we're looking at our training team. We've been looking at how we develop them over the past 18 months. So we've been running over that time a weekly series of development programs on everything and anything to do with learning. So from human-centered design to blended learning to the tools that you can use, to thinking differently about how you develop your portfolios and your curriculums of learning. So we very quickly knew that we'd have people who were sort of stuck in our laggard phase, I suppose, that was frightened to come out of the classroom. We reran masterclasses, much like PwC, looking at how do you make the most of an online learning environment? How do you supplement that with other bits and pieces of digital learning that could come out? How do you make an online environment engaging? Because we've been doing everything from webinars to 400-500 people to very small workshops, which are more discursive, that allow us to have a deep discussion and conversation. So that was the second phase, was just getting our trainers reinvigorated and up to date again. Then our third phase, which we really sort of into now, or have been over the last 3 or 4 weeks, was to look at how we support our production colleagues and also freelancers that generally work for the BBC, who are just out there on a limb. How do we work with them to give them something interesting and thoughtful that they could take away and help develop their thinking to take back into the production world as and when that kicks off again? So we've been running, much like the CIPD, we've been running twice weekly webinars called Lockdown Learning, and they're based on production. So we've been looking at masterclasses in storytelling. We've been looking at one-off sessions where someone like the producer from Killing Eve might come and talk about how they did the scene, or how the story came about, how a story unfolded. And that's become so popular that we're getting requests from all over the business now saying, well, actually, our design and engineering colleagues would like some information. Our news colleagues would like some information. Our HR colleagues would like to do some more of this. So we've created this environment where learning is happening, and they're only hour-long sessions. We put them, like CIPD as well, we put them as Watch Again, but we put them with a lot of connecting content. So there's a curated set of content that goes with that session that we have. And we've been connecting that out to there's a federation of entertainment unions who represent all the unions that work in broadcast circles, that those members can come and join us. So we've had to adapt, we've had to be agile, but we've been quite ready for it. And I think what the pandemic's meant for us as a function is we still had a little bit of creep, dragging the heels of, do we really want to change in some of our training areas? And it's meant, and also I think there's a real BBC thing of everything that we do has to be super high quality. And if it's not super high quality, we're not doing it. We've had to get over that. We've had to get over ourselves and actually say, let's try something, let's learn from it, let's understand what worked and what didn't work, let's pivot it and iterate it and do it again. And actually we've had some fantastic feedback, and I wish that we had the data that Sarah's got at PwC. We don't, but we have a brilliant benefit is we're just about to start the implementation project for a new learning experience platform, and everything that we're learning now, we can feed into that and take that in a different direction to what we thought it might go in. So that whole prioritise, digitise, socialise, humanise is absolutely playing out at the BBC. And I think in many ways our L&D function has become more confident and more self-promoting, I suppose, and saying, look what we're doing, look what we're here to support you, what more can we do? And the business are coming back and saying, well, this is amazing. you just want to say, well, actually it was available 12 months ago, but you know, it took a pandemic. We're grateful of that. I think there are loads of questions, because we do have people saying, well, when are we going to get, we've got a whole function of the academy that deals with looking after classroom training and classroom training bookings. So there are things that we're going to have to change. And I think as a senior management team, we look at that and say, actually, we're not going to go back to the way we are. We're going to take what's working, the best things that are working out of this situation, and build on them and deliver differently. So there won't ever be going back to what we did. It will always be new.
Thank you so much for that, Jenny. That's brilliant story, and particularly for us, resonates not making things perfect as when we started doing these webinars, maybe slightly shonky. Could argue they're still slightly shonky, but we're trying our best. I'm going to get on to Q&A. Can I ask you all to unmute yourselves? Had quite a lot of questions. I'm going to try and take as many as possible and also blend them together. We've had quite a few quite tactical ones that I'll just put to you, Sarah and Jenny, first, about what platforms you're using and where you're finding those platforms and what is proving most useful. And Sarah, there was quite a lot of interest in whether it was stuff you've built yourself or you're buying it in from elsewhere. Can you just offer some insight on that?
Yeah, so we have our LMS, a core LMS, which is Cornerstone On Demand. And then layered on top of that, we have a experience layer, which is provided by DXC, which is the DXC Experience Hub. And linked into that is our learning analytics system, which is Watershed. So we have all of our data from Cornerstone and our LXP all flowing into our Watershed system. So we're getting a mix of both our informal and our formal learning data in there. So we're getting a complete 360 look at that. And then we can, extract that data and meld it with other types of data as well. So that's what we're using. Jenny, what are you using?
So we have our own made Academy Zone, which is developed for us by BBC engineers. That's backed up, so our sort of our LMS engine is SuccessFactors, because we want to integrate learning experience platform, which will be a combination of SAP Jam with a blend by Talent Team integration. We want to move away from the BBC built system for us, because that's very limited from a learning perspective, into this new world. So that's what we're doing now. For our evaluation data, we take the standard surveys out of SuccessFactors, but we also add to that, we use Smartsheet, but any online survey that goes out, and all of the evaluations into that then feed into Tableau for our reporting systems.
Thank you. We've had a few questions, and maybe Andy, you can offer some advice on this first, about organisations that perhaps are a bit smaller, or don't have a huge budget. Where should they start if they don't have access to the kind of infrastructure that Sarah and Jenny have luckily got?
It's a really good question, and I think I'd start with this thing here. I mean, the smartphone, I think, is revolutionising learning. And often in many organisations, even larger ones, the best technology is actually owned by the staff themselves. I mean, obviously, in the case of Sarah and Jenny, really brilliant platforms there. And I think I'd be encouraging, if you're in a smaller context or you don't have huge technology budgets, I think this is the time to think about how to lever the use of the smartphone. Now, you can curate content. There's brilliant stuff out there. We were with an organisation recently who now have a TED Talk Tuesday, where they all share a TED Talk and they have a great discussion around it. You've probably got social platforms which you can use there, LinkedIn, closed groups. There's so many things you can do. So I think I'd encourage you. And from my perspective as well, I've been in smaller settings. Don't think you can't do this stuff, but I think it's thinking creatively. And as I said, I'd look at leveraging the technology which folks have actually got, and thinking about curation and those kind of things, about how you can connect people to great content, even if you just send an email out once a week with some fantastic links of things that you might want to look and discuss.
I mean, Andy, I think you're really right there. And also, I mean, look at this. We're on a Zoom meeting, right? We've got questions and answers. We've got chat. We've got, fantastic presentations. If you just have to look at how creative people are being with free platforms for making connections globally. I've done online bingo, more quizzes than I've ever done in my lifetime,
Yeah.
There's so much stuff that people are being so creative with personally. And I think if you're a small organization with no budget or a minimal budget, you can put something together really polished for not a lot. That's my personal opinion right now, because the technology is there and open to all. And the majority of people have got a smartphone of one form or other, right?
Yeah.
I think we're all getting more used to using the online tools as well, because we're not going anywhere else.
Yeah, I think, Kate, just quickly on that one, there was another question about learning mindset. And I think just to wrap that one, I think that's so vital. It is about mindset and not necessarily about what you've got. So I think this is actually thinking about, for all of us, encouraging people to have, as Sarah said, that innovative mindset. And then I think you've got a chance to do some really clever things.
Thank you. Jenny, somebody's asked, you mentioned kind of lobbying the business. I'm going to combine a couple of questions here. How did you start that? What results are you seeing? And then I saw an earlier question, somebody asking, as a more junior L&D consultant, do you have any advice on how they can influence?
Okay, well, that's a big one. Okay, so the lobbying piece has been going on for some time. And what we've done is gone in at different levels. So at the top, the way we've done it is by teaching the business how people learn. So actually, we've got a deck of slides. They start off with how human brains work, and actually, we don't retain information like a computer. So the more we scope the background into, if you want people to make a real change, to make a difference in whatever outcomes it is you want to make a difference in, you've got to understand that just getting them in a classroom is not going to make that change. So we've done a lot of lobbying from that perspective. And then talked about or got people to think about how they learn outside of the workplace. Because generally we Google something, look it up on YouTube, however many YouTube videos I've watched in lockdown learning all the new skills that I've learned. So it's those conversations. And I would say it's the luck of having, to begin with, it's a bit like starting a snowball off. It's the luck of having someone within the business who really gets what you're trying to do and is willing to be your guinea pig and go with you. So we had a fantastic situation where our director for health and safety security and was happy to say, okay, I've got a sheep dip mandatory training. You tell me how you can deliver this differently so I can meet my compliant elements, but actually there's something for people to refer to when they've got that need. So we went out, we've redeveloped mandatory training from a health and safety perspective. And in doing that, that started that snowball rolling. So we're now doing programs with BBC Sport. We're doing programs with local radio. Very interestingly, the program with local radio, what the stakeholder thought the learners wanted wasn't actually the problem. So the learning was actually focused on something completely different, but it solved the outcome that the business was looking for. So it really is a process of time. It's not overnight. It's not a magic wand. It's using your expertise in L&D. It's using the right layers of the business and getting it different levels, getting in at different levels, but having a few people that are willing to go with you and willing to give something new a try.
Thank you.
Oh, and for your learning, your new person into L&D, I think the biggest thing is listening. So you dig into those coaching skills, really listen to your stakeholder, really understand what it is that they're trying to do, but equally spend as much time listening to the learners, really understand where their problem is in trying to achieve whatever goal the stakeholder wants to achieve, because that's where you'll get those nuggets of gold that allow you to create a really brilliant learning intervention.
Thank you. Had a couple. Oh, sorry, Sarah.
I was just going to follow up and say, I think that sort of goes for the same advice that you would have for organisations that have only got one person running L&D, right? I was just looking in the chat, and I was thinking about that. It's right, really listen to what your business wants, right? Yeah. I think also this is completely different from any operating environment we've ever had before. So not everything has to be done. So what are you going to give up and what are you going to focus on? And it's really working with the business or your leader or your manager or whatever to figure out what it is that's going to be most impactful and do that. And really don't worry about the small stuff, right? Because all that will get done at some point. It's really about if you've only got one person running L&D, what's the one thing that you can do that could be really transformational to your business?
Thanks, great advice there. You both acknowledged that you were in a pretty good position for this happening. What advice would you give to organisations that are perhaps a little bit less advanced in their journey about how they can move from traditional face-to-face to the new dimensions of a modern learning function? Andy, have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think sometimes if you feel that you're a little bit behind the curve, you can make a double jump. And we've seen many organizations do that. You don't have to necessarily go through an incremental process of development. You could maybe go from high dependency on face-to-face to smartphone learning in one go. So I'd encourage you, don't think that you can't make that kind of leap. So I think what I'd encourage you to do, for me, this is thinking about, as Jenny said, this is human-centered design. I'd really be thinking, what have your learners got access to? And as Sarah said, Zoom, all these kind of things, and you jump to those things quite quickly. And as I said, this has got to be design as we go. This is not about perfectionism. This is about getting things out to people. So part of the learning process, and hey, we're learning people, we should be doing this. Part of the process is learning as we go. So yeah, double jump. That would be my encouragement if you feel you've got a little way to go.
And if you are ever in a position to be able to seek forgiveness, now is it, right? Because right now you've got kids coming in, you've got delivery vans, you know, you had one, I've just had one. I'm just thinking, is my Ring doorbell going to fly into my conference call at the moment? You know, this is the time to really experiment and be brave. And people are really, really up for it. And they're really forgiving as well. So I think this double jump, Andy, I think if you don't have a sort of as a sophisticated environment as maybe Jenny and I have got, I think you've got the most amazing opportunity right now to really, really transform what you're doing for the better.
Totally.
I agree. Yeah, there's such an appetite for, okay, we're in this together, so let's experiment together. I think the one thing I'd add to both of those comments is bring however many people in your training team, whether it's small or large, bring them with you. So do something specific for them to help them feel more at ease with the change, to help them understand what's good practice. You know, create a safe space where you're checking in and using that evaluation to iterate what you're trying. Because the more you bring them on, the faster you're going to go forward.
Thank you. I'm going to attempt to do several things at once with our last 5 minutes. I know we had another poll, so Danielle can get that up. Please answer that. But while that's being answered, I'm also going to ask another question. Can I start with you, Andy? What do you think are the top skills that L&D is going to require in the new normal, and what skills do you think will become redundant?
Yeah, whoa, crumbs, redundant skills. That's a really good one, isn't it? I think the skills we've got to do now, we've got to be really good listeners and really good askers of really good questions. So I think this is about moving to asking learners and the business, the organization, what they need. So to that extent, it's not about just providing what you think you need, it's actually providing what is needed. So I think that's a key skill. I think digital, there's been some great questions in there. Is it inferior? I don't think it is. I think great design, brilliantly designed digital learning has a massive impact. So I think we've got to look for quality in what we're doing. And I think redundant skills, I think if we are dependent and addicted to face-to-face, that has gone now. And I think we need to deal with that kind of thing. So that's for me.
Thank you. I'm going to add to that for Sarah and Jenny. We have a few questions about career opportunities and people who are looking to make a move into L&D, and is this the right time to do it, or is this a terrifying time to do it? What do you think about that? And also to add to Andy's points about the skills that are currently emergent.
Who do you want to go first?
Jenny, you go first.
Jenny, you go.
So yeah, I agree with Andy. Top skills has to be listening. I think bringing people into L&D that have a real sense of human-centered design. So whether that's from an L&D perspective, or maybe that's just from a UX and D in the D&E world, but someone that can listen and understand and interpret what people want. I don't see digital and face-to-face being, I think learning is a blended mix of lots of different channels. So actually, I don't think anything will be redundant apart from maybe the classroom environment. And actually, we should be looking at how we transform and develop our traditional face-to-face classroom trainers to be able to, going back to what Andy was saying earlier about socialising and how you nurture people in a digital environment. You know, if we can develop our training teams to have those skills to nurture learning in a different way, it's extending their reach, and we're getting something much better from it. And the second part of that, I've forgotten what the question was, Casey.
Coming into the function now, becoming an
L&D professional. I think it's a great time to come into the function. I think it's a real. I think L&D will have an emergence from this because we are doing so more, and because of the situation that we're in, people are experiencing us more, particularly in my world, because there are people that, you know, learning. It's a great time to do learning because there's not a huge amount more to do, or learning suiting a need because they quickly need to learn something new for the skills that they're taking on. So I think I think there's a real emergence for what we're doing in L&D going forward.
Yeah, I think learning could really have its moment if you play it right. I think it's now. You can make the most impact on your business now. I think if you are young, looking to come into L&D, wow, what an exciting time to step into the door of it. I think there's lots of people still looking and recruiting. So there was a comment earlier on about, should I give up even trying to look for something? And I think, no, you should absolutely. I've recruited 3 people recently that I have never ever met physically face to face. They're all joining the team. They've just joined, or I've got somebody joining in about another month. And all those interviews were done virtually, and we've done a virtual onboarding and buddying them in the team and everything. So I just think now is such a fantastic time to be in this industry.
That's a really lovely positive note to end on. And now I'm going to ask if it's possible to see the results of the poll. Yes. Oh my God, we've cracked it with 1 minute to go.
How interesting. So
really interesting.
Yeah, Kate, just quickly on that one. This is something we're seeing, that actually helping managers and staff to understand creative learning is really important in the ecosystem. We sometimes have quite traditional ways of thinking, so that's a really interesting one for me. That it's about us as learning folks building this great environment where creative learning is going on.
Thank you. I'm really sorry, I'm going to have to bring it to a close there because we are out of time. A quick reminder, we had a lot of questions about, will the slides be available? Will the recording be available? The answer is yes, everything will be available hopefully in the next couple of hours. If you head to the CIPD website, the Coronavirus Hub, it's all there. We'll also be putting it out on social media. I'm really sorry we didn't get to answer all the questions because there were so many, but we'll collate those and we'll try and think of a creative way that we might be able to address this again, seeing as we're doing so many of these right now. Thank you so much to our panel. Thanks everybody for watching. And a final reminder to sign up for future webinars, including our one on Friday on psychological well-being and the impact this is having on all of us psychologically. And a final reminder about our new well-being support for members in the UK and Ireland. You can see a slide about that on your screen now. But that's it from us this afternoon. Thanks very much for watching, and we will see you next time.
Thanks.
Thanks a lot. Bye for now.